What's up, guys? It is Sam here, coming to you live from where I'm at, and I'm gonna bring to you the most epic battle of the evening between the Democratic presidential candidates. We've got Andrew Yang, Pete, I don't know how to say his last name, Corey, and Harris. That's what I'm gonna go by. Yang and Harris, I am using their last names because they are shorter. And Pete and Corey, I'm using their first names is because their names are shorter. So that is how we are going to refer to them. And the events that we're going to be competing in today are web search, YouTube search, hashtags on Instagram and on Twitter, and their actual campaign website. And before I get into any of that, if this is your first time here, what's up? My name is Sam. And if you're returning, good to freaking see you. And what we're going to do is start at the web search and work our way through. Now, what triggered this... the thought for this video was that today Fox News came out with a primary. By the way, this is not plugged in if you were wondering. Primary, like who somebody would vote for. So in their results here, they say it's a national poll, and Andrew Yang is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th. He's ranked 7th nationally. And so what I did was take the next 3 players above him. Pete Buttigieg, I'm not even going to try to say his last name, Cory Booker, and Kamala Harris. I took those 3 people because according to the polling data that Fox News is using, we are, he's in 7th place. Completely lost my train of thought. He's in 7th place, and I want to see what the actual data shows according to those events that I talked about. The search volume on YouTube, on Google to start with. So what we're going to do is start at the 12-month mark, and this is for the search terms for each of their names. So we have Andrew and Pete and Corey and Harris, and how many times they search for those names. Obviously their full name. And so the average volume over the past 12 months for search terms, Harris was, it looks like at least double what everyone else was in terms of average search volume over the past 12 months. And if you look at the more specific geographic data, the only state that is not has a larger percentage of search volume relative to the other candidates in these states, so more than 25% or so, I don't know, more than 51% or whatever. And that's Pete. He has one state, I don't know what state it is, but it's kind of in the middle of the country. And then if we step it in a little bit, we're going to go to the 90-day. So this is much more relevant data because it's a lot closer. And it still looks like Harris is about search for about twice as much online as every single other candidate, right? We've got Yang, Pete, Corey, and Kamala in this epic battle here. Now we're going to come into the 30-day, and when we step into the 30-day, we actually see something very interesting. Over the past 30 days, Yang has substantially increased in interest on Google search to the point where he is almost just as searched as Harris is over the past 30 days. They're almost level. She's slightly higher. And now there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 states that are searching more for Yang than for Harris. Now let's jump in one more time to Well, actually, not the last time. Just kidding. But just to the 7 day. So this is the most recent data. And before I even, like, I'm looking at the graph here, and Yang is substantially ahead of everybody across the entire last 7 days, except for Harris. It looks like she had slightly more volume of searches on 1 day over the last 7 days. Otherwise, Andrew Yang was substantially more relevant in terms of search volume. And he was also winning on the geographic standpoint, meaning that all states were searching for his name over everybody else's, except for one state that searched a little bit more for Harris than that. Now we're going to come into the super recent, over the past 24 hours. So if we look at the last 24 hours, it is almost like Andrew Yang actually has the double the amount of search as any other person. And Camilla is the only one that is even halfway there. The other two, Pete and Corey, have even less than Harris, like a decent amount less. And at this point, which is kind of interesting, now this is kind of interesting, on the geographic level, on the 7 day out, we saw Andrew had all the states but one, which was Harris. Now, over the past 24 hours, Yang has all the states but two, except for that is not Harris this time. These people are actually searching for Pete. So that is kind of interesting. Now, let's step it up one more time to over the past 4 hours. And see the most recent data on all of this. Oh wow! And this one, Andrew Yang has probably 2.5 times as much search volume over the last 4 hours as any other candidate, and the vast majority of all the states he's also winning, except for Pete in 3 states and Harrison, Alaska. So, if I'm looking at this, I'm going to be probably a little bit more leaning to the closer side of what is going on to give a ranking here. Remember, because we've got the web, and then we have YouTube search, then we have hashtags, and then we have their website. So we got to pick a winner right now for the web search, and given that the Andrew Yang has the most amount of search in the more recent time period, even though in the macro at the 12-month he wasn't winning, I feel that there's a tremendous amount of momentum behind that search. And given that there was a bunch of charts where he was at the top of, whether it was the 4 hour, 1 day, or 7 day, I think it also even at the 30, I think it was at the 30 day as well. So I'm going to give this first one to this guy up here in the corner, Andrew Yang. So we'll give that category. Next is going to be the YouTube search. So we're going to conduct the YouTube search analysis very similarly to what we did for the Google search analysis. We're going to start at the 12-month, and then we're going to just kind of step in towards we get to the most relevant data. Now, starting at the macro 12-month view on YouTube, kind of interesting, different story than Google search, where if we went back to the Google search at the 12-month view, Harris was number 1 by a large margin. On YouTube, over the past 12 months, Yang is number 1 by a decent sized margin. So that's interesting that YouTube paints a different story than the web or like Google, right? Because Google, in just the past short period of time, like 30 days or so, Andrew Yang has really started to build up momentum, but it looks like the momentum actually started on YouTube because it's much more evolved and it's been over a long period of time. So that's kind of interesting. Now let's jump forward to the 90-day look here. So this is 3 months. We've got same thing. He's got a pretty substantial lead. If you had to quantify it, I would probably say it's about 1.4 to 1.5 times larger in terms of search volume for Yang versus the other characters that we have in this event. Okay, and on the geographic level, it is primarily Yang with 3 states to Harris, and it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It looks like there's about 7 or 8 states for Pete in terms of the geographic search. Now let's jump into the more recent stuff, the fun stuff, which is the 30-day, right? Okay, so at the 30-day, it is a substantially different story. There is probably close to 2.5 to 3 times as many searches for Yang versus all the other characters. And that's comparing it to the second closest person, which is probably about 2.5 times as popular as the other two. So we're going to just go through in order here in terms of the average per day and I'm going to compare them to Yangs, right? So we've got Cory Booker with the least amount of interest on YouTube, and Yang has probably close to 7 times as much volume. It's like 7 times more volume. That's crazy. The next is Pete. He's also very small, and maybe it would be like 6 to 5.5 times as big. And lastly, we have Harris, which is probably 3 times bigger than. So that's a substantial lead at the 30-day. So let's go into the 7. I think we're just going to see more of the same thing throughout this entire one. So I'll move quickly. Yes, over the last 7 days, the lead has substantially increased again. By, instead of being 5 or 6 or 7 times larger in terms of search volume, like getting into the 10s. Like that's pretty high. Now we're going to jump into the 4-hour. We'll just step ahead here. Same thing on the 4-hour. I could have predicted that. So I think you guys know. You already know who won that one, right? That is Mr. Yang as well. Okay, but remember, according to Fox News, this dude, in terms of the national polling, is behind the other 3 players, right? According to Fox News, Mr. Yang is behind these people on a national poll. And that poll came out today. Today is 8:15. Okay, so now let's jump on to the next battlefield, and that is hashtags. So we're going to take a look at the hashtags on Instagram, and we're going to take a look at the hashtags on Twitter. So this is going to be kind of interesting because we'll be able to see 3 things about hashtags, and that's going to be the growth rate in usage. So the hashtag is going to be hashtag Kamala Harris, right? Hashtag Andrew Yang. Hashtag Pete, his last name. Hashtag Cory Booker, right? We're going to use those. And we're going to look at the growth rate in that usage on a monthly basis, 1 data point. But then we'll be able to look at it on a 2-month basis and growth over time. This is pretty relevant data, right? This is over the last 8 weeks. And lastly, I just found this very interesting because there's a large gap. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the percentage of people with the English language as the person behind the usage of these hashtags. So let me say that again. This last bit, we're going to take a look at the people whose languages are being used when this hashtag is being used. So this is going to be very interesting. We're going to start with those 3 things. And like the first one, we're going to start with Andrew Yang. His monthly trend in terms of hashtag usage on Instagram and on Twitter is up by 2%. So month over month, not bad. It seems pretty small to me, honestly. It seems pretty weak. And if you look over the last 8 weeks, it's actually increasing. So it's a little ups and downs. But it definitely looks like it's slightly up and to the right, which is what you would like to see. Maybe only a slightly greater slope of increase, but that may happen over time. So don't forget to press that subscribe button if you want to see that happen. Anyways, next we're going to look at the language. And remember what I said. This is the people who are using this hashtag and the language that those people use on these platforms, Instagram and Twitter. So for Mr. Yang, we have 22% of people are non-English speaking. Okay, so now next, we're going to take a look at Pete and his growth on a monthly basis for the use of these hashtags across these platforms I mentioned is 0. Oh, that's a very, very low growth rate. Now, we're going to look at the popularity over the previous 8 weeks, and it appears like a little volatile, just a slightly less volatile than Andrew's, but it's up and to the right, but the growth is even, like, it's pretty flat. Like, there's only a tiny bit of growth over time. And then the percentage of people who have other languages than English who are using this hashtag is 16%, so smaller than Andrew Yang, which I'm assuming Pete is a very white name, but I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea, but it seems like that. Next is the Cory Booker, and her monthly trend in terms of this hashtag growth rate is 0 as well. That's interesting. And her, the usage of hers looks very similar on the graph over the past 8 weeks as it did as Andrew Yang's, where there was like a hot spot and then it come down and then another hot spot. Hers looks very, very similar to that. And Cory Booker, I actually don't really know who this guy is, honestly. I just saw a couple of pictures where he has a shaved head, but I didn't actually read or listen to any of his content. But he has 4% of people that do not speak English who are using this hashtag. And then lastly, let's take a look at Harris and her growth rate in these her hashtag on Twitter and Instagram. And she is down 8% month over month. So she is So if you look at just the growth rate across her, remember that was Andrew Yang at positive 2%, 0 growth for Pete and Cory, and negative monthly growth for Harris. So currently, just based on that, he is ahead. And next, over the past 2 months, the popularity has gone up and then down and then up and then down, but it's actually lower now than it was 2 months ago, which means that is up in the right and going down to the left. Not exactly what you want to see if you're trying to gain relevance. And then there's a 7% of people who do not speak English who use this hashtag. So that's kind of interesting because okay, so now let's take a look at that. Let's pick a winner for the over the past 2 months. Just gonna swing back through. So up and to the right for Andrew. Slow growth for Pete. I'm gonna call this a tie, I would say, between Andrew and Cory in terms of the over the last 2 months. So now it really comes down to this last thing here, and this is clearly subjective as fuck, right? But I think that I'm going to give you the rationale and the logic behind it, but I think that having a larger percentage of people using your hashtag who do not speak English could be a very, very interesting thing, in that through that he is able to relate to more people, and that is how you gain popularity, is through people feeling comfortable enough to relate to you, and associated with that, you can come up with some type of, grassroots movement. I don't know. I just find that very interesting. So I was going to give that category to Andrew. His was 22% versus 16, 4, and 7%. So I find that kind of interesting. So now, if you look at those two, there was the first one, which was the growth, which Andrew Yang won. Cory won the popularity over the past 2 months. And then in the last one, Yang won that one. So when we look at this one, right, we've got hashtags here. We are going to go with Mr. Yang again. Next, I wanted to take a little detour into Seizure Town. Their website. So before I get into their websites, this is the detour. I went through and Googled each one of their campaign websites. And so we're going to start off with Yang, just going to work our way through like we have been. And his site comes up, and then Wikipedia. So we jumped on to, you know what I mean? Nothing, I wasn't expecting anything, but I wanted to take a deeper look to give you guys a different perspective that you may not have thought of, right? So then you go to Pete, okay, and he's advertising for his site, so that's kind of interesting. So he's spending money to get in front of people to put his site in front of them. So that's kind of interesting. Take note. Next, we're going to jump on to Cory Booker, and he is also advertising. But here's the thing. He is advertising to Blue Act, which is just a basically donations site for that a lot of the candidates are using to gain donors or whatever, and gain obviously money. So next, that's kind of interesting. Now remember, draw that distinction. Pete is advertising to his website. Cory is advertising to a different site that is not his. Now let's go to Harris, and Yang is not advertising. At least there was no data that came up when I searched. I mean, you just literally put in Kamala Harris website, and this is what comes up, like on my Google search. And she is advertising, and she is also advertising for herself. So another interesting thing here is that Cory Booker is advertising to gain money, whereas Kamala Harris and Pete are advertising to push people to their sites, but they also can gain money on their sites. So I want to give interesting strategy here, and I don't have any data on any of these players in terms of